I would now like to introduce and invite our next speaker, Divya Khanna, a brand strategist, an account planner, and author of the book, The Company We Keep. Divya Khanna is a freelance consultant on brand strategy and marketing communications. Her strategic insights have benefited a diverse range of brands catering to consumers from all strata of society. Today, as she joins us for Quorum, she will delve deeper into culture at the workplace and share insights that remain elusive to us in our busy corporate lives. After her keynote address, she will be joined by Bharatendu Kabi, Head of Corporate Communications and CSR at Hero MotoCorp. Divya, may we have you here?
Hi, everyone. I see some of you have picked up my book. Thank you very much for that. And I would love to thank the Promise Foundation and especially Amita and Amit for inviting me here and giving me this platform. Let me just give you a little bit of brief background. I won't go into the full book since some of you might decide to read it. Yeah. So let me start by why I wrote this book. So I worked in advertising for 16 years, and I see a lot of you are also communication professionals, so I guess you would have some sort of insight into the kind of work I was doing. And what happened was that I was working very hard. I spent all of my time obsessing about my job. I didn't have time to invest in my health, in my relationships, and I was just very stretched. And what happens when you're stretched, you think, if I'll work through the weekend, I'll work through the holidays, I'll work through the night, and I will get it done. But what happens is, because you are kind of stretching yourself too thin, the work also suffers. And so then you end up in this double bind where you think, oh, I have worked so hard, I should be appreciated. But the quality of your work is so bad that, you're just constantly being told to redo it. And you're like, why did I work the weekend if, people are just going to shit all over it on Mondays? So this is the situation I was in. And it took me a full year to come to this decision. It's not easy. Given the way that we are brought up as Indians and the kind of pressure and value that is put of work in our culture. So when I took this break, I was, of course, trying to fix my health, but I did a lot of introspection. And, it's very easy, like, how, when we are kind of unhappy with something, it's always very easy to blame something that is external to us, to say, our parents did this, or our boss did this, or our client did this, or to even say, and I hear this word thrown out a lot, which is about toxic culture, a toxic boss, a toxic client, a toxic environment, And it always kind of made me think, because these are all inanimate things that we're talking about. When you talk about culture, it's something that is made by people. It's not something that exists outside of us. So somewhere we must be contributing to it, or we must be buying into it for it to be toxic. So that is why I started writing this book. The whole idea was that I wanted answers for myself. I was, my specialty is studying consumer behavior, and I rely a lot on market research to do that. And so I decided, why don't I treat this like a market research project? And let me find out, because obviously I did something in my corporate career that didn't work, but there are a lot of people who go through this burnout, but they come out stronger. So, what is it that I can learn, and what is it that I can do right? Because I don't want to take a break, get all right, and then go back to a corporate job and then again suffer the whole thing again. Yeah, so this is the only quote that I'm using from my book, which is that we don't outgrow our need to be accepted, to be admired, and to be popular in the cultures we want to belong to. So like, when you join a new college or a new school, you want to be with the popular kids, you want to have the right friends. And that's what happens when we are in the corporate culture as well, You want to be a successful PR professional or a successful marketing manager. There are certain things that you need to do, certain things that are, certain behaviors which are kind of considered acceptable or considered as the sign of a success in those careers. So one of the key things about Indian culture that I found is that we have this emphasis on hard work. We want to, I was just talking to Bharatendu before the break, and we were talking about how, this need for staying late in the office. A lot of people have told me, some friends, some batchmates, and some juniors, that they don't feel comfortable leaving the office if their boss is still in the office. Because it seems as if they've left the boss to carry all the work, and they are scooting. And at the same time, I have had uncles who are very, very successful, much older, a different generation, and they used to leave at 5:30, and they would always tell me, like, if you're staying later than 5:30, you're clearly not good at your job, you're not efficient. But there is this little peer pressure that comes in that, we feel hard work is very important. And if I'm doing it fast and I'm doing it quick and easy, maybe I'm taking a shortcut and maybe that's not good enough. So these are just a few, this is just to give you a kind of a brief synopsis of what you might expect in the book. These are the areas of insights that I have covered. And, the first and foremost thing is the status consciousness. As Indians, we feel the need to kind of know, how we relate to another person and whether that person is senior to us or junior to us, So this is a very important thing because as a culture, we want to be progressive. We want to keep moving up that hierarchy. And the only way that we can do that is through corporate culture because we can't change our communities, our religions, our family structures. We can't suddenly become the oldest son instead of the youngest son. But in the corporate world, if I become a vice president, then that gives me a certain amount of cachet when I introduce myself, even within the family, even within existing status hierarchies. And, so because status is so important to us, one of the things is that stress always flows downwards. One of the things that almost every respondent I spoke to in my research would talk about is how communication is very different when it's amongst peers, when it's with juniors, or when it's with people who are senior to you. And sometimes, I think it would be a very interesting experiment to do for those of you who are in corporate communications or who are in HR, would be to, figure out and see that if you're doing a feedback performance of a 360 feedback performance of somebody, is there a difference in how the bosses are talking about that person and the subordinates are talking? It would be really interesting to see. And it's not something that, I mean in a hypocritical or nasty way. It's just, it's so inbuilt in us. And, because hierarchy is important and we feel the boss holds everything, one of the things that almost everybody talked about in my research was this thing about managing the boss. And the problem is that when you're afraid to kind of give the boss bad news or you're afraid to kind of, say things, then a lot of disasters can happen, right? A lot of the, if you watch all these documentaries which are there on Netflix on, some financial fraud or some big, mistake or some big problem in a business, a lot of it is because at some point somebody senior started going off the tracks and people could see that, but they couldn't address it. The other thing, of course, gender stereotypes. I can see from this room that PR is a lot like advertising. So we have a large number of women. And, so maybe in these industries, it doesn't happen so much, but in a lot of companies and industries, they're trying to encourage women to work. And so they have these diversity policies, which actually are working against the women. Because in a sense, it's creating a lot of resentment from men. We are kind of programmed with gender stereotypes that for the woman, the family should come first and for the man to be the provider. But women also want to do well in their careers and men also want flexibility and family time. They are not indispensable just because, they have to only bring in the paycheck and now that's all the family needs them for. That's not true. So these are some of the things. The main, I think, the environment that we all feel this is the competitiveness and the pressure. Like, I was talking to Chitra and I heard a little bit of her talk earlier. And, she talked about trust in relationships and we had several conversations around that. A lot of people came to talk to her about that point because it hit home for them. And the fact of the matter is that when we live in a world where things move very fast, when deliverables have to happen almost immediately, we don't have the time to build relationships. Then it does become transactional and that is something that we're losing out on. And the more pressure we face, we are passing that pressure on to the people around us. So, this is something which I feel, with my book, what I'm trying to address is, I'm not giving you any clear answers, but I am trying to say that, maybe there's a better way of doing things and maybe we need to find out what that is for ourselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. And heartiest congratulations, Divya, first of all.
Thank you.
For the publication of your debut book, right?
Yes.
I picked up this book on Tuesday evening because the neighborhood bookstore that I buy my books from did not have it for the entire duration of the weekend, and they promised that they will get it to me on Monday, but Tuesday I picked it up, and we have this today. So I had only one working day, and I knew that I won't be able to read it during work. So I had only Tuesday night to finish it, and that day was the Champions League semi-final between Real Madrid and Man City. So you had guided me to where to actually, which are the key chapters. Actually, the entire book is very fascinating. But I finished the book, but in bits and pieces. Early morning, you have to be up and about, go to work. I must commend you for writing this book, and most of you will read it. It's a highly personal account. You have spoken from the heart. Stuff which most of us really hesitate to talk about with others. The self-doubts, the vulnerabilities, the burnout, and then the very urge to fit into the system, to be accepted, what you call the corporate caste system. So let me start by asking you actually two questions. When did it dawn on you that, hey, about time that I must take a break? Now, for all of us who are in the corporate sector, taking a break sometimes is not a great thing because probably it's seen as a break in your career, to put it simply. And for an advertising professional, you took that bold decision. So when did it really occur to you that this is now, that about time that I take a break? And the second question is, when did you really muster up the courage to be convinced yourself to tell this story to all of us, to the world, that I must tell this story?
Okay, so to answer the first part of the question, I don't think, I don't know how much choice I had because eventually I reached a point where a break was necessary. But also, I took a whole year to make that decision. So it's not that one day I had a bad day and I said, okay, that's it, I'm done. The day I felt like, oh my God, I don't want to do this anymore, I took a year from then to kind of be sure. So what I did in that period was, of course, I needed to get my finances in order because taking a break is not easy when you're used to a corporate salary. But the other thing was to also see if, maybe it's just, a few things which can be fixed. So actually that last 1 year of my work was actually an experimental year for me because I tried to do things differently. I tried to reach out for help. I tried to, do what I felt was in my power to do. And at the end of that year, what I realized was that, somewhere that ambition and that competitiveness that was drilled into me, as it is in all of us from a very young age, was slowly seeping out. And one day when I woke up and I said, because my whole idea was, and this, I'm sure everybody in the corporate world knows this, is that a lot of times when you go to your boss and you say, I'm fed up, this is it, I'm going. Sometimes it's not a real authentic move. Sometimes it's a power play. Sometimes it's a way of kind of, shaking things up and reminding that person that, hey, I'm here and do you value me or do you not? And that happened when I put in my papers. I had a lot of these long conversations where people kept trying to tell me, what do you want? We can keep you here. And actually, I had already reached the point where I said, no matter what they do, they could have tripled my salary, they could have, given me a promotion, and it just wouldn't have mattered because I felt genuinely that I was not doing something good for me, and I also believed by then that I was not contributing much to the organization. So in a way, it was not so much of a choice. I tried my best to fight against it, and then eventually I felt, okay, let me take a break, let me get my health in order, and let me freshen up and see where I'm going wrong. The second part of the question where, to tell my story, honestly, the first part was to tell the story to myself, and these were tools that I understand. So, as a consumer behavior specialist, I really rely on research, and I said, okay, if I take a cross-section, because I did feel at that point that I was in the minority. I did feel that maybe I am the one who's failing. Maybe, everybody else seems to just get on and move on from it. Everybody has this point, but it's not such a big pressure point that people leave their jobs, to move out or to do other things. But there was a small trend that was happening. And there, so I felt that what is it that I can do different? Like I said, my last 1 year was an experiment to say, okay, what can I do differently? But when I tried that, nothing seemed to work. It didn't change the way I felt. In fact, it reinforced for me the need to take a break. So I said, okay, let me do market research. And I always wanted to write as a child. So I said, okay, this is my opportunity. Let me try writing. And let me see what story I can tell. And eventually, I felt that, if I can get it published, then it's a story worth telling, So the publishing part of it was incidental. The whole part for me was that I needed to learn something, and this was my way of, learning it for myself.
I had my second question ready, but I'm tempted to ask. So that writing part you spoke about, that itself must have been a journey, right?
Yes, it was. So, I was one of those kids in school who used to write poetries and stories, and, so we all, traditionally what happens is in a family, you say, oh, you can write, people are encouraging the child. But what I did was I took a writing workshop, and there's a, very, very good writing workshop in Bangalore called the, world famous semi-deluxe writing workshop, and it's run by three very good authors, Zach Oye, Anita Nair, and, sorry, not Anita Nair, I've got Anita Desai, and, no, sorry, I've got the names wrong again, I'm going a little blank, but very good writers, and they had people from all different types of writing come in and teach us. And what I learned over there was how to work on writing. So like some of my chapters actually had 30 drafts when I was writing them, and I would credit that to the writing program I attended.
In your book, you have spoken about the very tight corporate hierarchy system. You also just mentioned the toxicity, the gender biases. In your experience, who drives culture in an organization? Is it always top-down, or even the toxicity and some of the regular stuff that you talk about, sitting late at work, is it also sometimes self-driven by very self-motivated, career-driven, whether middle-level, junior-level colleagues who on their own, they prefer that kind of a work culture, which then becomes a part of the ethos of the organization. So is it, what is your own personal experience?
So this is very complicated as a question, and I don't know if there's a correct answer. But let me take a step back and say that, a lot of us, when somebody's in a senior position, they feel entitled to kind of make changes and to do things their ways. But a lot of people who join, and especially the freshers, when it's your first job, you're really trying to fit in. But at the same time, there are things that make you uncomfortable. There are things that you don't want to do. And it's really our choice, So there are a lot of times, and I think it works in every way, because culture is people. Culture is not a rule book. If we all feel that, working late is a good thing, and we can't admit that we don't want to do it, then we are perpetuating that, even if we don't agree with it. But if, we talk about this all the time. People in my age group, we always talk about younger people who will turn around and say, but hey, that's a weekend. But, I have plans with my, significant other or family. I have something and I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be able to do it. And we always kind of get shocked, and then we huddle around with our peers and we say, we never dared to talk to our bosses like this. But the truth is that we did want to talk to our bosses like this. It's just that we believed that we would be fired if we did. So we had that insecurity, and I would say hats off to the younger people, because if they can say this to their bosses, then clearly they are more assertive and they're speaking their truth. And I feel a lot of authenticity is one of the findings in my book, is that, we all at work want to wear this kind of corporate persona because we want to project ourselves a certain way. We want to make sure that we are not overlooked in the, the big scheme of things. But the truth of the matter is that we all get tired. We all have other priorities in our life. And, work is important. It's a very, very important part of our lives, but it's not the only thing. And sometimes the price is too high for us to pay. So it's who is responsible? Everybody is responsible. But culture changes slowly, and only we can change it, right? We already have a younger generation who's now starting to stand up and say, look, this is my personal time.
Very well said. I understand it's a very complicated question. Complex question, and we all find ourselves in such complicated situations at place of work. When I'm speaking to you, the author of The Company We Keep, and we are discussing about work culture, work-life balance, etc., I cannot not touch upon diversity at place of work. And in this case, particularly gender diversity. I'm not trying to broaden this subject. Today, diversity, equity, inclusion, these are buzzwords, starting from the boardroom to the shop floor. In your long career at senior level, What has been your experience? Do you think, of course, today there are shining examples of organizations who are really championing these causes. But generally speaking, what has been your experience? Is there or have you experienced a genuine commitment by leaders, by organizations towards DE&I, or is it merely lip service?
I can't generalize too much, but in my experience, what I've seen is that the intentions are right. I don't think that any leader that is talking about diversity and inclusion is actually trying to do something bad or trying to reverse it. They do genuinely want to make that change, but I feel often the way that they're trying to make that change is not, is kind of backfiring. The thing is, as women, we all know that, one of the big things for us is safety, and especially in big cities. We worry about what time we will get home, and our families worry for us, and our friends worry for us, and yes, even our bosses and our clients worry for us. And, personally speaking, I grew up in Bombay, which was a little safer city, and I was used to doing a lot of things by myself. In my initial career, I always resented this. I always said that, why is everybody trying to protect me when I want to go out and do great things? I kind of felt that they were babying me, and I didn't feel empowered when they said that, oh, let a man do it. And then that was one part of it. The other part of it is that, you're trying to make it easier for women to come into work, but the fact is that at work, we are competing with each other. And if you are giving women special privileges, like, there were some young people in my research who complained, there were young guys who complained, and they said, the women are picked up and dropped from their homes, and we are not even given an allowance for travel. So, they see it as unfair. So when we're talking diversity and inclusion, to create that kind of an environment, everybody needs to feel safe, and everybody needs to feel that, they're being treated fairly. And I think sometimes these things backfire, like if a boss has an important project he wants to give to two people, and he'll say, the woman will probably have, her in-laws over, and she may not be able to take it on. He thinks he's being understanding, but he's probably preempting her ambition. What if she wants to do it regardless of whatever other family compulsion she has? And, to say, oh, this guy, I'll just send him to this, this factory and let him work the whole night and let him, make sure that, all this work is done because it's an emergency and he's a boy so he can take it. That's also not fair, right? So I think this is a complicated question because at the end of the day, when we go to work, I always felt like this. I don't know how many of you would relate, but I always saw myself as a person. I saw myself as a planner. I never really thought much about, oh, I'm a woman planner and there's a male planner and he's different from me. That there's things that he can do which I can't and I can do which he can't. That's not true. So if we want to be treated like that, then somewhere the diversity can't be so, there's this, it's for example, like my father. He's always supported me in my career. In fact, he pushes me much harder than I want to go. But on the other hand, he's also so protective of me that I feel like, his good intentions are actually getting camouflaged by his protectiveness. This protective patriarchy that we have actually kind of, diminishes us in our own eyes also, and it creates an unfair world on the other side, So, gender issues doesn't mean that it's only to do with women, it's also to do with men. And if we have to work together as teams, we can't be seeing the other person as the enemy, that this person has an unfair advantage, which I don't. So as much as women resent the fact that, a lot of times men are being given higher salaries and better promotions, I think men also resent the fact that, they don't have as much flexibility as women are given, or they don't have as much concern for their safety. So that's...
Shouldn't we put our hands together for such a lovely response? Yeah. So well articulated. Very well articulated.
Thank you.
I cannot not share one anecdote listening to you. I was at a seminar about 10 years back, maybe a little more, 12 years back, and it was a panel discussion, and there were very successful people on the dais, and there was a banker, and the moderator was introducing everybody on the panel and said, meet this person, one of India's most successful women banker. So she said, thank you, I'm successful, but you don't have to say woman, they can see I'm a woman. So you don't have to qualify that, yeah. So 10, 12 years back, those things were not discussed in the manner that we are openly discussing today. Coming back to the book, when I was going through the company we keep, I could clearly see your journey being, I can divide it into two parts. And you have touched upon it in the book also. By the time you took a break, COVID-19 was not part of our lexicon. You took a break, probably a couple of years, and then when you started writing the book, if I remember correctly, February 2020, when it was practically knocking at our door.
Yes.
So one is the pre-COVID-19. The other one is the post-pandemic. Thanks to, or rather ironically, I shouldn't be saying thanks to, on account of the COVID-19, the entire, the term work-life balance has undergone a complete paradigm shift. The entire meaning had changed. Pre-pandemic, regular life we had, and all of us used to come back from work. Our spouses or the families used to tell us that, hey, when you enter home, keep your work at least in the garage, if not at place of work.
Right.
You are entering home as one of us. What COVID did, work entered our home.
Right.
Entered our home, occupied our private space in the living room, in our study, sometimes even in the bedroom. A lot of us did calls sitting comfortably on our bed, doing all those digital calls. And work from home became part of our daily life as an accepted term.
Right.
In the context of what you have experienced in the pre-COVID era, if I may, and looking at how the entire work-life balance nomenclature had changed, do you think it has changed forever? I mean, it has brought about irrevocable change in work-life balance, the way we work. Or are we steadily, stealthily going back to the same old world that we used to work in?
So again, like I'm not a futurist, so I don't know if I can really predict where we are going.
No, your
but
experience.
Yeah, I can give you what my sense is. And my sense is that, before COVID, it was basically one size fits all. And yes, there were small trends happening. So e-commerce was a small trend, which thanks to COVID actually became a more mainstream phenomenon. So while the other retail stores were suffering, e-commerce was actually growing at double digits, and it's continuing to grow even after the pandemic, because now we're used to getting everything on our phone, and it's like, why should I go here, or why should I do anything in person? So, similarly, there was a small trend of people who, what we call the gig economy, work from anywhere. And yes, there are only certain professions and certain skill sets that you can do that with. But what happened with COVID-19 is that all companies and people, despite, in different professions and different industries, had to start figuring it out, because if they wanted to continue working through the lockdown, they could only do it if they had some way of making their work doable by remote. And I think now it is a era of customization and personalization that we're going, because now a lot more people want to be gig workers, because when you work from home, you do have a little bit more control over your time and your, what you do, when you do, how you do it, what you're wearing, right? Than you do when you are going to an office. When you go into an office, it's a little more formal, a little more rigid, and there are less things that you can kind of change to suit yourself. Now I feel that, a lot of people, like there is a large section of people, not everyone can afford to, but a large section of people are actually saying things like, I experienced this, I was doing this fancy job in Bombay, but I was also paying a high rent. And during the lockdown, I got to do that work from home in my hometown with my family, where I got quality time with them, where my expenses were much less, and my work was still being delivered. So why can't I, live like that? Why do I have to go back to Bombay and suffer the local trains and pay that high rent? So I think a lot of questioning is happening with COVID. And in a sense, the conversation I wanted to start with my book has already started. So, it's something that we're all trying to decide. And work-life balance is not one thing which, if you think you're going to read my book and get an answer, let me just, preempt you and say, no, I'm still looking for my answer. But the fact is that, what work-life balance means to me at my stage of life, and, what my family and friends and life situation is, would be different from somebody else. And even 2 years down the line, my definition will change again. So it's a question of all of us having to try and figure these things out. And while we are figuring it out, the companies will have to figure it out because it's supply and demand, right? As long as people are willing to work on their terms, then they will get to set the terms. But if a large number of people decide that no, we want it a different way, the companies will eventually have to go the way of the talent. So my sense is that we will have to try and find some sort of flexibility. I don't see it going back to a completely rigid system as of now.
Yeah, that has been by far probably the majority view. Some of the companies are going back, and very surprisingly, some of the tech companies are calling back their people to place of work. Which is surprising because they are the ones who can probably work from any part of the world, any remote part of the world. Okay, moving on. And there is something which all of us today face. When people of our generation, you and I, started our work, our career, the world was a completely different place. Probably a couple of decades down the road, not probably, the world had changed. If not beyond recognition, but significantly changed. Today, India, if I have to just talk about, it is the youngest country in the world. 65% of the population is below the age of 35.
Right.
So there is a new set of people who belong to a certain generation. They are today working with us. And I don't know about people of my generation present here in the room, but we do deal with it on a day-to-day basis. So that generation, their belief, their behavior, their lifestyle is a bit different from what we had. We were a little bit more respectful, which is how you are brought up at home. Not to say that they're not brought up in that way, but there is a bit of irreverence. There is a bit of entitlement. And there is a bit of strong individuality in setting the rules, setting the ground rules, etc. The work culture in corporates or the work-life balance, do you think currently it is predominantly reflecting this generation, or we are still stuck at a time when we started? Do you think that this generation is bringing about very good change in the context that they also want me time, which is very good. We didn't ask for it. We didn't dare ask for it, I must say. We didn't have the courage. I never had the courage. We used to work through weekends, sometimes still do. But this generation is bringing to the table some very significant positive change. Do you think, where are we heading in your experience? Have you noticed that already coming into the corporate culture?
So I think it's trying to come into corporate culture, but now please remember I've been on a break for 5 years, so my views may be a little dated. But what I see is that, it's the context. It's not, the generation is important, like Chitra also mentioned, that every generation has their values. But the generation's values come from the context in which they are born and brought up. So, to some extent, my generation cannot put too much blame on the next generation because they are our children, right? They have been brought up by us, so somewhere we played a role in making them the way they are. And also the fact of the matter is, one of the things, like I've used some experts to guide me through the writing of my book, and a lot of them are of course of my parents' generation, and they talk about how in their generation they didn't have the luxury to think of purpose, because the state that the country and their families and the level of the economy at that point, they had no choice but to do a job and to do it well and not worry about a purpose beyond providing for their families. Whereas today's generation don't necessarily have that pressure to provide for the family, and to some extent they have a little bit of financial cushioning, so they can go beyond the norm and they can look at things which are more fulfilling for them and not just about providing for the family. So I think it is about context. Today, there are all these digital tools which make things much faster and much easier to do, and there are also a lot of options. Like Chitra and I were talking about how your news media has to compete with everything else. It has to compete not just with digital media, but with cat videos, with baby videos, with whatever else you like to look up online, right? And that is what is happening now, is that the younger people today, they are living in a more democratic world, in a more affluent world, in a world with less financial and family responsibilities, and therefore they have more focus on themselves and what they want. You know, the earlier generation didn't have that. So I think it's a function of context, and as the context keeps changing, this, the generational values will also change. And not to say that, anything is completely bad, because, yes, we are becoming a more democratic country. So people, while the status hierarchy exists, it is becoming a little bit less rigid. It is allowing some questioning. And in my view, that is a good thing. The younger generation believes a lot more in bringing their authentic selves to work, and I think that is also a good thing. But I think with my book, what I'm trying to, the only message that I have for people is that we need to keep introspecting and deciding, rather than just going along with the flow, which is what I think I did for a large part of my career, is I just did what was the done thing, rather than thinking, is this right for me and is this what I want? So, again, I don't have a definitive answer.
No, fair.
Yeah.
You have probably answered my last question, which I was keeping for the youngsters in this hall. Probably you just touched upon it. What would you advise youngsters today coming into the corporates? They're highly aspirational, they have dreams in their eyes, etc., so that they don't have to face or go through some of the challenging experiences that we had to. What would there be some tips that you want to share with them?
So again, these tips are not just for the youngsters, it's for everybody. If we want culture to be more positive and, to change it in the direction that we want, we need to be, very real with ourselves. What is it that we want and what is it that we don't want? And also, for youngsters especially, it is a question of try, learn, fail, relearn, and then, decide. And also know that the decisions you make today will not hold true 5 years down the line, because your priorities will change. So it's a continuous process. It's not a one-time thing that, okay, I've decided I want to be in PR with this firm and that's it, At some point, PR is going to evolve, your firm is going to evolve, and you are going to evolve, and you are going to move to a different life stage. So what is it that you will want at that point? So you need to think, you need to be open to the fact that today I've made a decision, but tomorrow I might change my mind. And for the more experienced people, I would say that, it's a dichotomy, right? It's like how, you felt like you've brought up your children thinking, when our parents did this, we didn't like it, and so we want to be a different kind of parent. But at the same time, you're still a parent, and you still feel that, certain values we should have enforced. And it's the same thing when you get into senior management. When you have people reporting into you, you are still an employee, and you're still capable of relating to all the employees, because you don't cease to be that just because you're a manager. And at the same time, so I've had a lot of, for example, friends who are team leaders who've said, I don't want to go back to the office, but there's pressure in the company to get people back into the office, and so I have to be hard on my teams and I have to pull them in. That's a very difficult part for a leader, to make people do things that they themselves don't want to do. So it's a question of being real and saying, okay, what can be done, what can't be done. It's never going to be a perfect thing, but it's an ongoing thing, and we are all in it together.
So to sum up, basically, one has to make those choices for oneself. Yes. Probably sometimes to do a trade-off. You have to choose what your priorities are, and stay flexible. Yes. Stay dynamic, stay flexible with the changing times, right? Do we have time for taking a few questions from the audience? So, okay, one or two. I'll add one more.
So I was asking, how can an organizational culture effectively inspire the younger generation, right, to achieve exceptional work, or to achieve success without compromising work-life balance, or requiring them to work excessive hours and all that? How can an organization do that?
So, before I get to the organization, I found in my own experience, even while I work on this book, is that it's not possible to have work-life balance in one day. Today I've decided to focus on work, and tomorrow I might make sure that I do my exercise routine and, focus on my health. And day after tomorrow I might say this is family time. So work-life balance is an ongoing thing. It's not something that, I've achieved. It's like, If anybody's ever been to a boarding school, you have a very strict timetable. You wake up at this time, you have breakfast at this time, you have class, you have prep for time for doing your homework, time for studying, and literally every minute of your day's thing. And the fact of the matter is that it can be comforting for a while to have a routine like this, and then eventually you want to break out of it. And then you can have a very loose routine, because believe me, I've swung from one end to the other, and then you feel bored of it and you feel like I want some discipline back in my life. So it's a constant ongoing thing. I don't know. And sometimes, yes, there will be deadlines where you will say, okay, these 2 days I'm going to work, but then I'm going to take 2 days off to sleep. So it's there's no one perfect solution. From an organizational point of view, I think, I really resonated with some of the things that Chitra was talking about. End of the day, it's about people. Just because we are professionals, or because we work in a certain company, or we earn a certain salary or have a certain designation, we don't stop being human beings. And we want to relate with each other on a human level. And, it's like those whole hypocritical things, right? We always tell our parents, you tell me to do this, but you don't do this. And companies are very much the same. So a company can pay lip service, but until they take action, they are not going to actually inspire anybody. So it's a question of, matching purpose of the company and purpose of the individual, and understanding their values, creating a safe environment for them to do their best. Because I think everybody does want to contribute. The whole reason we come to do jobs and to work is not just to get a salary. Especially when you're a little bit affluent, you're doing it more, you're doing it for validation. You want to kind of feel like you contributed to something bigger than yourself. And so it's for organizations to be able to understand that and connect on a people-to-people level. So it's not about, this company will connect to this employee. It's about the people in that company who are working with that employee. What kind of environment are they creating? And I think a lot of it also depends on the millennials and Gen Zs to kind of, be expressive and communicate and try and change things, because sometimes they might come up with ideas that, the older people may not be able to come up with.
Yeah, very well said. And also, just to add to that, we do keep learning from our youngsters, from our teammates, the youngsters in our team. But I can't resist adding to what you said. Sometimes when you run out of ideas, look for new ideas, it helps to read old books. So,
yes.
yeah. So for
yes.
some of us
Yes.
in that generation. So I've been warned that I can only take one question, one more. Yeah. Anybody from the back? No? Okay, sir. Sir, sure.
Yes.
Can we have the mic here?
My name is Mayur. I'm from Ideosphere. Like I said, I don't want to start a fire, but we are here, and it's a good place to start a fire. This work-life balance, or how everyone now is saying, why don't we call it life-work balance, right? Why work gets.
Right.
How far are we from 4-day weeks?
Oh, that's a very, very interesting question, and I'd like to know the answer myself. Like I said, I'm a freelance writer and, planner, so I don't have an in on this. But I would love a 4-day week. I've been a big fan of Ricardo Semler. I don't know if you've read his books, but he was one of the people who pioneered the 4-day week, and now I believe Europe is testing it out. I think it all depends on us as a culture. Are we going to encourage other people to have a 4-day week is my question. I want it for myself, but do I really believe in, this is one of the things that was very interesting when I did my research while the COVID pandemic was happening, that, on one hand, people love the flexibility of work, saying, I can take a little nap in the afternoon and then I'll come back to work more productive, or I can do my exercise while a meeting is happening because the camera is off and I can walk around and I get 2 things done at the same time. So from a personal point of view, we all love that. But if you had people reporting to you, were worried about those people doing the exact same thing that you wanted to do. So it's, we all have to decide, it's not, I don't think it's something that's impossible, that it'll never happen. And for all we know, it might happen if, one country that we look up to manages to do it that way, then we might just follow them and say, they do it in Sweden or wherever, and we want to do it the same. I hope it happens.
With permission from Amit and Anubhuti. Quick one. Ideally avoid.
This is very interesting. It's a debate, right? I am waiting the day Sweden, Norway, Finland go back to 6-day week. See, understand, basic is they're losing economies. It's easier for them to do. Rather by doing those 4 days week, they're saving a lot of things. So India has been a factory. India's strength is their hard work. They have been looking at And we are population sitting here, right? If we start teaching them to be lazy, that's the end of us.
Short speech. Short.
Yeah. So I think that's what I personally feel.
Thank you for your input, because this is the belief that we have. Somewhere deep down, we all believe that. One of the reasons why I worked on this book was that I was worried that if I do nothing while I'm taking a break, I might never be fit to do a job again. And of course, I needed to show my father that, see, I'm doing something. I'm not completely useless, right? So it's our cultural beliefs. We have to decide what we want to do.
So eventually, I think what you are trying to say is that there are choices that all of us has to
Right.
make, each to his or her own. Sometimes one has to probably do a trade-off. What makes
Yes.
you happy? I mean,
Yes.
being at work, looking after your family, or just kind of be your own person. So I think with your wisdom, this event today has really gone up multiple notches in its stature. And guys, if you still haven't got this book, please grab a copy. It is an unputdownable book. As I said, I had just finished the Champions League semi-final. Eyes were blurry, and I went through that. So heartiest congratulations, Divya, again, and all the very best.
Thank you so much.
Can we hear it for Divya, please?
Thank you so much.